Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about something truly grim. Something that would make your current job look like a vacation. We're diving into the most miserable jobs during a pandemic. Imagine a world where a deadly sickness sweeps through. And your job, the one that puts food on your table, also puts you directly in the path of death. These aren't the heroes with gleaming scientific tools. These are the folks covered in filth, constantly surrounded by suffering, and utterly indispensable to a society collapsing under the weight of disease. Honestly, if you had one of these jobs, you probably wouldn't survive the sheer physical and mental toll, let alone the actual plague. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a 17th century European city, the air thick with the stench of sickness and the pervasive dread of the unseen enemy. A figure approaches, cloaked in heavy, dark garments, his face obscured by a grotesque, bird-like mask. This isn't a character from a horror story. This is the Plague Doctor, and his job is arguably one of the most miserable, terrifying, and essential roles during an epidemic. His very presence is a harbinger of doom, a chilling symbol of death's relentless march. Imagine his daily routine. You wake up, not to the promise of a new day, but to the certainty of more suffering. Your first task is to don that infamous costume, a heavy, waxed canvas or leather overcoat, leather breeches, gloves, and a wide-brimmed hat. The most distinctive, and perhaps most disturbing. Piece of his attire is that long, bird-like beak mask. It's not just for show, it's filled with pungent aromatic substances, dried herbs like mint, myrrh, camphor, and cloves intended to filter out the bad air, or miasma. Believed to cause the plague, it's supposed to protect him from the very air he breathes. Though, of course, it offers no protection against the actual bacteria. Think about trying to work all day in what essentially amounts to a medieval hazmat suit. Stifling hot, vision obscured, and smelling like a giant potpourri. You'd probably pass out from the heat before the plague even got to you. Consider the actual work he performs. You accompany him on his perilous rounds, moving from house to house, street to street, where families are dying in agony. His duties are gruesome and varied. He is not a healer in the modern sense. His primary role is often to document the spread of the disease, to record the deaths, and to witness last wills and testaments. He's often the last official face many victims see. A grim reaper in leathery garb, he might apply rudimentary poultices to the infamous buboes, the swollen, painful lymph nodes that are a hallmark of the plague, or attempt crude lancing. A procedure that, without sterile conditions, often worsened the infection. He's dealing with open sores, putrid smells, and the raw, desperate pleas of the dying. The sheer amount of human suffering he witnesses daily is unimaginable. The constant threat of infection is paramount. Despite his elaborate costume, the Plague Doctor is constantly exposed. He breathes the same air, touches the same contaminated bodies, and moves through the same infected environments. His lifespan during an epidemic is notoriously short. He is paid. Yes, often by the municipality. A grim form of hazard pay. But that money buys him very little security. His job is literally a death sentence. A horrifying bargain struck between desperation and duty. Historians still debate the true efficacy of the Plague Doctor's costume in preventing disease. But its psychological impact on both the wearer and the public was undoubtedly profound. It looked terrifying. But maybe that was the point, to scare the disease away, or at least scare people into compliance. You notice the social isolation he faces, while essential. The plague doctor is often feared and avoided by the healthy. His presence signifies death, and people instinctively recoil from him. He is a pariah, isolated by the very nature of his profession. He might live in segregated quarters, unable to return home to his family for fear of bringing the plague with him. This profound loneliness, coupled with the constant exposure to human suffering, must have taken an unimaginable toll on his mental well-being. He's a walking symbol of doom, utterly alone in his grim task. The lack of effective treatments means his work is often futile. He witnesses countless deaths, knowing there is little he can do to truly save anyone. His interventions are often symbolic gestures, small attempts to alleviate pain or provide spiritual comfort. Rather than actual cures, this pervasive sense of helplessness, the constant defeat in the face of an unstoppable enemy, must have been soul-crushing. He's not fighting a battle he can win. He's merely documenting the losses. You're now moving from the eerie rounds of the plague doctor and into an even more visceral, physically grueling, and emotionally devastating occupation. The gravedigger's grim grind, when death tolls reached unimaginable heights during epidemics. The sheer volume of deceased bodies overwhelmed traditional burial systems, forcing communities to rely on those few brave or desperate. Souls willing to confront death head-on, day after day. Their job wasn't just miserable, it was a constant, back-breaking dance with decay, despair, and an ever-present threat. Imagine yourself in a medieval city. The air thick not just with the stench of disease, but with the cloying, sickly sweet smell of decomposition. The church bells are tolling incessantly, a constant, mournful knell for the endless stream of dead. You are a gravedigger, one of the last remaining, and your day begins before dawn and often ends long after dusk. Your tools are simple: a shovel, a pickaxe, perhaps a cart. Your uniform is whatever meager clothing you possess, soon to be stained with earth, sweat, and the unspeakable fluids of the dying. This isn't just unpleasant, it's a hellish existence. A constant confrontation with the raw, brutal reality of mass death. Consider the sheer physical demands of the job. You are digging constantly, hour after hour, day after day. The ground is often hard, frozen in winter, or waterlogged in spring. You are excavating mass graves, not individual plots. Often shallow trenches quickly filled and then reopened for more bodies. Imagine the blisters on your hands, the aching in your back, the perpetual exhaustion that seeps into your bones. The work is relentless because death is relentless. You're trying to keep up with a grim reaper who never sleeps. It's truly a job for someone who either has an iron constitution or has simply given up on life. You observe the horrifying sights you encounter. Bodies are brought to you not just by the cartload, but by families desperate to dispose of their loved ones. They are often unceremoniously dumped, sometimes still warm, sometimes already bloated and discolored. You witness the grotesque symptoms of the plague firsthand: the swollen buboes, the blackening limbs, the vacant stares. The smell is beyond anything you can imagine. A pervasive, cloying odor that clings to your clothes, your hair, your very skin. You become immune to the sight of death. Not because you are heartless, but because if you allowed yourself to feel the full weight of each corpse, you would simply break. The constant threat of infection is, of course, paramount. You are literally wading through contagion. You handle bodies that are teeming with the disease, breathe the same air they breathed, and touch the same contaminated surfaces, while others flee the sick. You are forced to confront them, not just for a moment, but for hours on end. Day after day, gravediggers had incredibly high mortality rates, often succumbing to the very disease they were burying. They were quite literally digging their own graves, one shovel full at a time. Historians still debate the specific psychological impact of constantly handling dead bodies on the mental state of gravediggers. But contemporary accounts suggest profound trauma and desensitization were common. One particularly bleak detail is the social ostracism they faced. While indispensable, gravediggers were often reviled and shunned by the healthy. Their very presence was a reminder of mortality, and they were seen as unclean, tainted by their constant contact with death. They might be forced to live in segregated areas, unable to enter churches or partake in normal social life. This profound loneliness, coupled with the grim nature of their work, made their existence a living hell. No one wanted to be near them, but everyone needed them. You notice the lack of ceremony and respect that often accompanied the burials? In normal times, a burial would be a solemn, dignified affair. During a plague, it's a rush. Bodies are often thrown into communal pits, with little more than a mumbled prayer, if that. This stripping away of sacred ritual, this brutal dehumanization of the dead, must have weighed heavily on those forced to perform it. You are not just burying bodies, you are burying dignity. One shovel load at a time. The economic reality of the job, while providing some remuneration, was a grim bargain. You are paid for your services, often hazardously, by desperate families or overwhelmed municipalities. But what is that money truly worth when you are constantly facing death? When every coin might be a silent payment for your own inevitable demise, the wealth you accumulate, if any, comes at the highest possible price. You're now moving from the gruesome reality of the gravedigger and into a quieter, yet equally isolating and miserable plight. The abandoned village farmer. When a plague sweeps through a region, it doesn't just devastate cities, it can utterly cripple rural communities, leaving those who depend on the land in a terrifying limbo of isolation. Backbreaking labor and profound uncertainty. Their misery wasn't always dramatic or public, but a slow, grinding despair. Imagine yourself in a small, remote farming village in 14th century Europe. The news of the plague arrives slowly, carried by desperate refugees or grim rumors. Then, one by one, your neighbors fall ill. The small, close-knit community that once helped each other with harvests and shared meals suddenly evaporates. Families die out completely. You, a farmer, might be one of the few left. Standing alone amidst fields that still demand attention, livestock that still need tending, and a profound silence where laughter and conversation once echoed. The world outside has become a terrifying unknown, and your world inside is shrinking rapidly. Consider the sheer, overwhelming labor. Before the plague, farming was a communal effort. Now, you are doing it all alone. You are plowing fields that would have taken a team of oxen and several hands. By yourself, you are sowing seeds, weeding crops, and bringing in the harvest with no help. The livestock, once a manageable herd, now feels like an impossible burden. Milking cows, shearing sheep, mucking out stables. Every task is multiplied by the absence of your neighbors, your family, your friends. The physical exhaustion is relentless, a constant ache in your muscles, a bone-deep weariness that never truly leaves you. It's like trying to run an entire orchestra when you're the only musician left, playing every instrument at once. You observe the profound isolation. Communication with the outside world has ceased. Roads are dangerous, travelers are feared, and market towns are either abandoned or quarantining. You are cut off. News is unreliable, if it arrives at all. You don't know who is alive, who is dead, or if the plague will return with the next gust of wind. This isn't just physical isolation, it's a terrifying mental solitude, where fear and uncertainty are your only companions. The silence of the fields, once comforting, now feels oppressive, filled with the ghosts of those who are gone. One particularly devastating aspect is the loss of collective knowledge and infrastructure. Farming isn't just about individual labor, it's about shared expertise, communal tools, and a reliable market for your produce, with so many gone. The intricate web of rural life unravels. There's no one to share tips on crop rotation, no one to fix your broken plow, and no one to buy your surplus. The knowledge of specific local conditions, passed down through generations, might disappear with the elders who succumbed to the plague. The very agricultural systems that sustained life are disintegrating. Historians still debate the specific long-term impact of rural population decline on agricultural innovation versus consolidation of land ownership. But the immediate crisis for individual farmers was devastating. The economic impact is catastrophic. Even if you manage to bring in a harvest, who will buy it? Markets are closed, trade routes are disrupted, and there are far fewer mouths to feed or hands with coin to spend. Your produce might rot in the fields. Your livestock might starve from neglect. Or you might simply have no one to sell them to. The value of your labor, immense as it is, plummets, leaving you in a state of grinding poverty, even amidst potential plenty. It's like running a business and waking up one day to find your entire customer base has vanished. You notice the mental toll, the constant, gnawing fear of getting sick yourself, with no one to care for you, the crushing grief of losing everyone you knew, without the communal rituals of mourning, the despair of endless labor with no end in sight. Sleep offers little escape, haunted by the images of death and the looming specter of your own inevitable demise. It's a profound, existential loneliness that grinds down the spirit, making every sunrise feel less like a new beginning and more like another day of suffering. The very landscape becomes a grim reminder. Fields might lay fallow, overgrown with weeds, a testament to the missing hands that once tilled them. Abandoned homes stand empty, their doors unlatched, their windows staring out like vacant eyes. The quiet of the village is no longer peaceful. It's the silence of the dead. This environmental desolation mirrors the internal landscape of the surviving farmer. A constant visual cue of what has been lost, you're now moving from the isolated despair of the abandoned farmer and into an even more intimate, terrifying, and often overlooked misery, the unpaid, untouched servant in times of plague, for those working within the confines of a wealthy household. The home could transform from a place of work and relative security into a private prison, a sealed tomb where duty often meant a slow, agonizing death. Imagine yourself a household servant in a grand manor in 17th century London. You are part of the daily rhythm of the house. Perhaps a scullery maid, a stable hand, or a personal valet when the plague arrives. The city descends into chaos, but your world shrinks to the four walls of your employer's home. The family, if wealthy enough, might choose to self-isolate, barricading themselves inside, cutting off all contact with the outside world. And you, as their servant, are trapped with them, whether the disease is outside or worse, already lurking within. Consider the horrifying dilemma. Your employers, desperate to protect themselves, expect you to continue your duties. Even if one of them falls ill, you are forced to prepare meals, clean rooms, and perhaps even physically attend to the sick members of the household. Imagine washing the fevered brow of your mistress, changing the soiled sheets of a dying child, or emptying the chamber pot of a master ravaged by buboes. You are performing these intimate, dangerous tasks without any protective gear, without any real understanding of contagion, and with the chilling certainty that every touch, every breath, puts your own life at grave peril. It's like being asked to walk across a minefield. Blindfolded, while still carrying a tray of tea, you observe the stark social hierarchy in action. While the wealthy family members might isolate themselves in separate rooms, with their own food and water, you, the servant, are constantly moving between the sick and the supposedly healthy. Acting as an unwitting vector, your life is deemed less valuable, your safety secondary to the comfort and convenience of your employers. There's no escaping. Desertion means certain unemployment, likely starvation, and possibly legal punishment outside the manor walls. You are bound by duty, by necessity, and by fear. One particularly cruel aspect is the lack of payment or even basic provisions. With normal life suspended and trade routes disrupted, wages might cease, or food supplies dwindle. You are still working, still risking your life, but your compensation might become irregular or non-existent. You are trapped, working for nothing, and facing death. While your employers might still be hoarding what little food or resources remain, historians still debate the extent to which servants were intentionally exploited versus simply caught in an unprecedented crisis. But their vulnerability was undoubtedly extreme. The emotional toll is immense. You are witnessing the slow, agonizing deaths of your employers and fellow servants. You are cut off from your own family, if they live outside the manor, with no way to know if they are alive or dead. The isolation is profound, not just physical, but emotional. There's no one to share your fears with, no one to offer comfort. As everyone is consumed by their own terror, you are surrounded by suffering, yet utterly alone in your silent dread. You notice the terrifying realization that your job, usually a pathway to stability, has become a direct path to the grave. Every chore, every command, every moment spent in the presence of the sick is a gamble with your life. There's no escaping the contaminated environment. Your workplace is also your prison, and often, your deathbed. The sheer helplessness, the complete lack of agency over your own fate, must have been soul-crushing, even if you survive. The experience leaves an indelible scar. The trauma of witnessing such intense suffering, of being forced to confront death so intimately, and the lingering fear of contagion would haunt you for years. The memory of the unburied, the dying, the utter breakdown of social norms within the confines of the house, these indelible images would be your constant companions. You're now moving from the grim isolation of the household servant and into a unique, perhaps less physically gruesome, but profoundly psychologically taxing form of misery, the isolated lighthouse keeper in times of widespread disease, while cities descended into chaos. Those whose livelihoods depended on profound solitude, far from the madding crowds, found their isolation intensify into an almost unbearable burden. A psychological crucible where the fear of contagion became intertwined with the torment of utter loneliness. Imagine yourself perched atop a lonely lighthouse, perhaps off the coast of England during a severe outbreak, like the Great Plague of London. Your job is vital to keep the light burning, guiding ships safely past treacherous shores. Before the plague, your isolation was a chosen solitude, a quiet life far from the bustle of humanity. Now, it has become an enforced, terrifying prison. The occasional supply boat, once a lifeline to the outside world, might now be a source of dread, bringing not just provisions but potentially the invisible killer. Consider the profound psychological impact of this amplified isolation. You are literally cut off. There's no news, or only unreliable. Delayed whispers carried by the wind or an infrequent, terrified sailor. You don't know if your family on the mainland is alive or dead. Every creak of the lighthouse, every crashing wave, amplifies the silence and your own frantic thoughts. The world outside is dying, and you are merely an observer, powerless to help, utterly alone in your vigil. This isn't just physical separation, it's a deep, gnawing mental solitude, where the fear of the disease is compounded by the fear of being forgotten, of dying alone. It's like being cast away on a desert island, but you can see the mainland, and you know it's being devoured by an invisible monster. You observe the relentless routine. The light still needs tending. The lamp still needs fuel. The lens still needs cleaning. These monotonous tasks, once grounding, can become maddening in their repetition. A constant reminder of the unchanged world outside the dying one you imagine. Your only company is the rhythm of the waves, the cry of gulls, and the incessant ticking of your own thoughts. There's no distraction, no human interaction, no one to share your fears or hopes with. The lack of novelty, the endless sameness, combined with existential dread, can lead to severe cabin fever and a profound sense of despair. One particularly cruel aspect is the uncertainty of supplies. The supply boat, if it comes at all, might leave provisions on a desolate rock or beach, to be collected only after the crew has departed. Minimizing contact, you might find letters from home, left discreetly, but also learn of outbreaks in your home village. The fear isn't just that you'll get sick, it's that your essential supplies will stop coming, leaving you to starve or suffer from lack of basic necessities. This precarious dependence on an unreliable outside world added another layer of anxiety to an already stressful existence. Historians still debate the specific documented cases of lighthouse keepers succumbing to plague due to indirect contact versus dying from other causes while isolated. But the psychological toll of such isolation is widely acknowledged. The mental toll of watching ships pass by, knowing that they might be carrying the plague, or that they are fleeing from it, must have been immense. You are a silent witness to the world's suffering, unable to intervene, unable to escape. Every distant sail is a reminder of the life you are cut off from, and the danger that lurks beyond your isolated perch. The very purpose of your job to guide others highlights your own powerlessness in the face of the larger calamity. You notice how the concept of cleanliness becomes an obsession, with no understanding of germ theory. The lighthouse keeper might meticulously clean every surface, air out every room, convinced that maintaining extreme tidiness might ward off the unseen evil. This frantic, ritualistic cleaning offers a small semblance of control in a world where real control is impossible. A desperate effort to purify your confined space against an invisible threat. The possibility of falling ill yourself, completely alone, is a terrifying reality. There's no one to care for you, no one to summon help, no one to even know you've died until the light eventually goes out. Imagine the agony of a fever, the delirium, knowing that your only companion is the relentless sea and the knowledge that your vital duty is failing, because you are dying. This vulnerability, stripped bare by extreme isolation, defines the ultimate misery of this unique job during a pandemic. You're now moving from the isolated despair of the lighthouse keeper and stepping onto the unforgiving decks of the quarantined ship's crew, when disease swept across continents. Ships, the very arteries of global trade and communication, became terrifying floating prisons for the sailors and passengers aboard. The misery was compounded by suffocating confinement, dwindling resources, and the constant, inescapable presence of contagion on the open sea. Imagine yourself a sailor in the 18th century, a seasoned mariner, accustomed to the perils of storms and pirates. But now, your ship, having arrived at a bustling port from a distant land, is denied entry, a yellow flag, the dreaded symbol of quarantine, flutters from your mast. You are ordered to anchor in the outer harbor, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. The fear isn't just of the storm or enemy ships, it's of the invisible enemy that might be festering below deck. Or worse, that you are unwittingly bringing ashore the ship. Once your home and livelihood has become a floating prison, a potential coffin adrift on the waves. Consider the terrifying reality of contagion within such confined spaces. If a crew member falls ill, the disease can spread like wildfire through the cramped quarters, the shared berths, and the communal eating areas. You are trapped. There's no escaping the infected environment, no fleeing to solid ground. Imagine the coughing, the feverish groans, the spreading rashes, all just feet away from your own hammock. Every breath you take, every shared meal, Every interaction becomes a gamble with your life. The ship, designed for passage, transforms into a breeding ground for sickness. It's like being locked in a small room with a dozen people, and you know one of them has something deadly, but you don't know who. Or if you already have it, you observe the desperate attempts to contain the spread. The sick might be isolated in rudimentary infirmaries, often just a corner of the hold. Fresh air, often seen as a remedy for bad humors, might be pumped into lower decks, or attempts made to keep hatches open, however futile against a bacterial or viral enemy. Supplies, meant for a voyage of weeks, must now last for months. Fresh water dwindles, rations grow meager, and the monotony of confinement wears on everyone's sanity. The ship's surgeon, if one is even aboard, possesses only the most basic tools and the crudest of remedies. Utterly helpless against a widespread outbreak, one particularly cruel aspect is the psychological toll of uncertainty. You are isolated, not just from land, but often from reliable information. Rumors run rampant. Is the plague truly raging on shore? Has your own family succumbed? When will the quarantine end? This profound uncertainty, combined with the forced idleness and the constant threat of death, can lead to widespread despair, mutiny, or a pervasive sense of helplessness. Imagine staring at the distant coastline, knowing life continues there, but utterly unable to join it, trapped in a purgatory of the unknown. Historians still debate the specific psychological effects of prolonged shipboard quarantine on crew morale versus the fear of shore-based epidemics. But the strains were undeniably immense. The strict enforcement of quarantine laws could also lead to violence. You might see coastal patrols firing warning shots at any vessel attempting to break quarantine, or shore officials refusing to send supplies if the crew showed signs of defiance. The crew, in turn, might grow desperate, contemplating desertion or even violence against their own officers. The ship, once a microcosm of order, could descend into anarchy under the immense pressure of prolonged isolation and disease. You notice how the ship's captain, usually a figure of authority and control, becomes a helpless prisoner of the situation. Their command extends only to the physical confines of the ship. They cannot control the spread of disease or the whims of the port authorities. This breakdown of traditional command structures, coupled with the immense responsibility for lives they cannot save, must have been a crushing burden. Their leadership is reduced to managing despair and preserving order in a doomed floating world, even when the quarantine finally lifts. The experience leaves deep scars. Many crew members might be dead, others permanently weakened or traumatized. The bonds of camaraderie forged in normal voyages are replaced by suspicion and the haunting memory of shared suffering. The ocean, once a symbol of freedom, now carries the indelible stain of confinement and death. You're now moving from the suffocating confinement of the quarantined ship and into the volatile, high-stakes reality of the besieged city century. When plagues forced entire urban centers into lockdown, it fell to a grim, often desperate, band of guards to enforce the brutal rules of quarantine. Their misery wasn't just physical. It was a constant psychological battle against fear, desperation, and the raw violence of a population on the brink. Imagine yourself standing at the main gate of a major European city, perhaps Milan or Verona, during a devastating plague outbreak. The massive wooden gates are barred, sealed, sometimes even bricked up. You are a sentry, a guard, armed with a pike and a grim determination. Your orders are unequivocal: no one enters, no one leaves. This isn't a siege by an enemy army, it's a siege by an invisible killer. And your job is to keep that killer contained. Or, more accurately, to prevent its escape. The city, once a vibrant hub of life, is now a silent, fearful tomb. And you are its reluctant, terrified warden. Consider the profound psychological toll of this duty. Day after day, you stand watch, listening to the muffled sounds of suffering from within the city walls, the distant cries of the sick, the tolling of countless church bells, the eerie silence where bustling markets once stood. You hear stories, rumors, and desperate pleas from those trapped inside, begging for escape, for food, for medicine. You see the faces of despair and desperation pressed against the cracks in the gate. And you must remain unyielding. This constant exposure to overwhelming suffering, coupled with the immense responsibility of holding the line, grinds down your spirit. It's like being a bouncer at the gates of hell, and everyone inside is begging to get out. But you know letting them out means hell spreads. You observe the physical danger from those trying to break quarantine. Desperate citizens, driven by hunger, fear, or a desire to escape the plague, will attempt to bribe you, to plead with you, or even to assault you. Imagine a starving family, their faces gaunt, pressing against the gate, offering their last coins for passage, or a wealthy merchant, frantic to flee, attempting to rush past you. You are constantly on edge, knowing that any lapse could mean not just your own death, but the spread of the plague beyond the walls you guard. This creates a terrifying dynamic where compassion is a luxury you cannot afford, and vigilance is the only path to survival for the wider population. One particularly grim aspect is the threat from within. You are confined to your post, often sleeping in makeshift shelters near the gates. With limited contact with the outside, if the plague begins to spread among your fellow sentries, paranoia can quickly set in. Who among you is sick? Who is next? The camaraderie of soldiers can quickly dissolve into suspicion and fear. You might find yourself subtly distancing from your comrades, or questioning every cough and sneeze, knowing that the very people you rely on for protection could be carrying your death. Historians still debate the specific documented cases of sentry units being decimated by plague and the resulting breakdown of quarantine, but the inherent risk was undeniably high. The monotony of the duty is also a profound misery. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into months, all spent staring at the same imposing gate. The same desolate landscape outside, the lack of varied stimuli, combined with the extreme stress and constant vigilance, can lead to severe mental fatigue, hallucinations, or a profound sense of detachment. Your world shrinks to the gate, the wall, and the constant, nagging fear. You might be responsible for burning the possessions of the dead or sick that are brought to the gate for disposal, adding the acrid smell of smoke and the grim sight of destruction to your daily routine. Or perhaps you are tasked with receiving provisions left at a distance, ensuring no direct contact, and then distributing them to the desperate populace within. A logistical nightmare fraught with risk and tension. Your hands, constantly handling objects from infected zones, are a terrifying vector, even if you clean them with vinegar or alcohol. The best available disinfectants, the isolation from your own family is profound. If they are inside the city, you cannot reach them. If they are outside, you cannot know if they are safe. You are a solitary guardian, cut off from your personal life, sacrificing your own well-being for a collective survival that feels increasingly tenuous. It's a silent, lonely burden, carried by those whose duty placed them at the very edge of humanity's desperate struggle. You're now moving from the grim duty of the besieged city sentry and into the frantic, often futile, world of the desperate apothecary/chemist in times of rampant plague. These individuals, often working with limited scientific understanding and an overwhelming demand, faced an agonizing double burden trying to provide remedies to a dying populace while constantly battling their own fear. The scarcity of ingredients and the crushing realization of their own powerlessness. Imagine yourself in a cramped, dimly lit apothecary shop in 16th century Venice. The air is thick with the competing smells of dried herbs, strange tinctures, and the underlying scent of fear and decay wafting in from the streets. You, the apothecary, are surrounded by shelves filled with jars of powders, bottles of liquids, and bundles of dried roots. Normally, your days are spent meticulously preparing remedies for common ailments. But now, the line of desperate customers stretches out the door, each face contorted with illness or terror. This isn't just a job, it's a constant. Agonizing negotiation between hope and despair, a race against an invisible clock. Consider the overwhelming demand and the scarcity of ingredients. The sheer volume of the sick means you are constantly grinding, mixing, and dispensing, often for hours on end without rest. Rare or exotic ingredients, believed to be potent against the plague, quickly run out, forcing you to improvise or offer less effective alternatives. Imagine telling a pleading parent that you are out of the special antidote, or that the specific herb they believe will save their child is simply unobtainable. The desperation in their eyes is a constant. Crushing weight on your shoulders, it's like running a pharmacy during an apocalypse, and your main inventory is snake oil and good intentions. You observe the rudimentary and often bizarre nature of the remedies you are tasked with preparing. Without germ theory, most concoctions are based on the miasma theory or the balance of humors. You might be mixing strong purgatives to cleanse the body of bad humors, or preparing aromatic compounds for pomanders to ward off bad air. Imagine preparing a potion containing powdered unicorn horn if you could get it. And if you believed in it, crushed precious stones, or even dried animal parts, all believed to possess mystical or purifying properties. These remedies are costly, largely ineffective, and sometimes even harmful, but they are all you have to offer, and the public demands them. One particularly frustrating aspect is the constant threat of infection. Every customer who enters your shop is a potential carrier. You handle their coins, listen to their coughing, and breathe the same air they exhale. Despite your own efforts at cleanliness or the use of protective aromatic vapors, you are constantly exposed. Many apothecaries succumb to the very plagues they tried to combat, their shops eventually becoming silent, empty testaments to their futile struggle. Historians still debate the specific documented mortality rates of apothecaries during major plagues, but their consistent exposure meant a high risk of infection. The psychological burden is immense. You are witness to endless suffering. Knowing that most of your cures are ineffective, you see hope turn to despair in the eyes of your customers, and then hear news of their inevitable deaths. The knowledge that you are a frontline worker, yet powerless against the true enemy, must be soul-crushing. You are selling hope, but often delivering only false promises. A heavy weight for any conscience. You notice the moral dilemmas you face, with high demand and scarce ingredients. There is immense pressure to dilute remedies, to use cheaper substitutes, or to charge exorbitant prices. While many apothecaries remained ethical, the opportunity for exploitation was ripe. Imagine struggling with your conscience, knowing that a less effective but more profitable mixture might keep your family fed, even if it offers little real help to the dying. The pandemic pushed individuals to their moral limits. You're now moving from the desperate, often futile, efforts of the apothecary and into the hidden, yet equally perilous. Misery of the textile worker's deadly loom. While some jobs during a pandemic were visibly dangerous, others confined workers to crowded, unsanitary industrial settings where the threat of disease was often ignored or actively downplayed, sacrificing their lives for the sake of production. Their misery wasn't loud, it was a quiet, suffocating descent into sickness within the relentless grind of the factory. Imagine yourself in a textile mill in 19th century England, the air thick with cotton dust, the deafening roar of machinery, and the pervasive smell of sweat and damp fabric. Normally, your days are long and arduous, spent hunched over a loom or tending to spinning machines. Now, a virulent disease, perhaps cholera, typhus, or even an early influenza pandemic is sweeping through the crowded industrial towns. Your factory, far from being a sanctuary, becomes a breeding ground for contagion. A silent death trap masquerading as a workplace. Consider the extreme overcrowding and unsanitary conditions. Textile mills and other early factories were notorious for packing as many workers as possible into confined spaces. With little to no ventilation, you are standing shoulder to shoulder with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of other laborers, all breathing the same stale, dust-laden air. Sanitation facilities are primitive, if they exist at all, and clean water is a luxury. Imagine the ease with which a cough, a sneeze, or contaminated hands could spread disease through the entire workforce. It's like being forced to live in a petri dish, and the scientists running the experiment don't care about your well-being. You observe the relentless pressure to maintain production, even as illness sweeps through the factory. Management often prioritizes output over worker safety. Absenteeism is punished, and wages are docked for illness. You might see workers, feverish and weak, forcing themselves to continue, knowing that a single day's absence could mean starvation for their families. This economic coercion traps them in a cycle of exposure and illness, forcing a grim choice between immediate hunger and potential death. The loom never stops, even if the worker operating it is on their last breath. One particularly cruel aspect is the lack of understanding or acknowledgement of airborne transmission. While some general hygiene might be encouraged, the idea that tiny, invisible particles could spread disease through the air was still rudimentary or ignored. The focus might be on moral failings or bad diet as causes of illness, deflecting blame from the inherently dangerous working conditions. This meant that the very environment you worked in was a constant threat, and no amount of personal effort could truly protect you. Historians still debate the specific documented instances where factory owners actively suppressed information about disease spread versus simply operating with common contemporary ignorance. But the workers' vulnerability was immense. The absence of sick leave or worker protections further amplifies the misery. If you get sick, you simply don't get paid. There's no safety net, no insurance, no government support. Your family goes hungry. This forces a desperate gamble: continue working and risk death, or stay home and face destitution. Many chose the former, literally working themselves into an early grave to support their dependents. It's a brutal system where the cost of illness is borne entirely by the most vulnerable. You notice the profound isolation within the crowd. Despite being surrounded by people, the relentless noise of the machinery, the long hours, and the pervasive fear often prevented genuine human connection. You are a cog in a vast industrial machine, easily replaced, and your individual suffering is often unseen and unacknowledged by the system. The sheer dehumanization of the work meant that, even in a crowded factory, you could feel utterly alone in your misery. The environmental hazards beyond disease also played a role. The combination of lint-filled air, poor lighting, and repetitive strain injuries already made textile work incredibly difficult. Add a deadly contagion to this mix, and the misery compounds exponentially. Your body is already breaking down from the physical demands, making you even more susceptible to illness. It's a vicious cycle of exploitation and despair, hidden behind the walls of industrial progress. You're now at the final stop on our journey through the miserable jobs of pandemics, bringing us from the grim past right up to the present day. To reflect on the modern essential worker's burden, while we have science, vaccines, and vastly improved sanitation, the fundamental anxieties, dangers, and often unrecognized sacrifices of historical frontline workers echo profoundly in the challenges faced by today's essential laborers during contemporary pandemics. It's like seeing the same old play performed on a new stage, with better props, But the core script of human vulnerability and systemic pressure remains chillingly familiar. Imagine yourself in a grocery store, a hospital, a delivery truck, or a public transport vehicle during a recent global pandemic. The streets might be emptier, many people working safely from home, but you are out there. Your job requires your physical presence, putting you in direct contact with the public, with potentially contaminated surfaces, and with a very invisible enemy that others are trying to avoid. You are deemed essential. A title that comes with a heavy burden, the expectation that you will continue to perform your duties, often with inadequate protection, for modest pay, and with the constant, gnawing fear of bringing the virus home to your family. It's like being told you're a hero, but then being handed a rusty shield and told to charge into battle. Consider the heightened risk of exposure while the 17th century plague doctor donned his strange beak. You might be wearing a flimsy paper mask and thin gloves. If you're lucky enough to have them, you are interacting with countless individuals, some of whom may be asymptomatic carriers or visibly ill. You wipe down surfaces, handle cash, deliver packages, and care for the sick, all the while knowing that every interaction is a roll of the dice. The invisible threat is omnipresent, turning routine tasks into acts of quiet bravery. This isn't just a job, it's a constant. Low-grade fear of contagion, a fear that gnaws at you even when you're off the clock. You observe the psychological toll of working through a crisis, the relentless pressure, the constant anxiety, the witnessing of suffering, whether direct in a hospital or indirect through customer panic and aggression, grinds down mental well-being. You might experience burnout, compassion fatigue, or a pervasive sense of dread. The gratitude expressed by the public, while appreciated, often feels insufficient against the backdrop of real danger and systemic neglect. It's like getting a round of applause while you're still standing on a battlefield. One particularly frustrating aspect is the disparity in public perception and compensation. While lauded as heroes in public pronouncements, many essential workers, especially those in lower wage service industries, often receive minimal hazard pay, if any. Their wages, already low, are not commensurate with the increased risk and stress. You might feel a sense of resentment watching others work safely from home, enjoying newfound flexibility, while you put your life on the line for a meager paycheck. This economic injustice, a clear echo of the unpaid servant or exploited textile worker, creates a profound sense of unfairness. Sociologists still debate the long-term impact of this perceived inequity on labor movements and worker solidarity. But its immediate effect on morale was significant. The lack of adequate protections and resources is another persistent misery. You might be struggling with a shortage of personal protective equipment, PPE, facing constantly changing safety guidelines, or working in understaffed environments where the workload is overwhelming. Imagine a nurse battling a surge of critically ill patients without enough masks, or a grocery store clerk trying to enforce social distancing with no authority and an angry customer. The system, often unprepared, places the burden directly onto the shoulders of its essential workers. You notice the shift in customer or public behavior. While some customers might be understanding and grateful, others, fueled by fear, misinformation, or simply a lack of empathy, become aggressive, demanding, or openly hostile. You might face verbal abuse for enforcing safety rules, or be treated as a disposable cog in the machine rather than a human being putting themselves at risk. This added layer of interpersonal friction makes an already difficult job almost unbearable. The blurring of work and home life takes on a different dimension for essential workers, while remote workers struggled with the office encroaching on their homes. Essential workers grappled with the terrifying possibility of their workplace contagion entering their homes. You might live in fear of infecting your children, your elderly parents, or your vulnerable partner. This constant, internalized dread, often leading to self-isolation even from loved ones, is a unique and agonizing burden that extends far beyond the shift, as the echoes of the hardest labors during pandemics gently dissolve into the quietude of your room. Let your mind drift away from the weary sighs and the unseen dangers. Feel the subtle tension in your thoughts ease, imagining the vast tapestry of human resilience, woven through centuries of struggle, now softening into a peaceful, indistinct blur. The journey through the grim realities of plague doctors and gravediggers, to the silent burdens of modern essential workers, has reached its gentle conclusion, leaving you in the serene stillness of your own space. The flickering moments of desperate duty and profound sacrifice, of relentless toil and quiet courage, are now fading into a tranquil calm. Let the soft hum of the fan, or the serene silence of your room, guide you deeper into profound relaxation. There's nothing left to fear, no impossible task to face, no silent threat to endure, just the peaceful rhythm of your own breath, easing you further and further into a restful slumber. Let the last remnants of our historical dive into the misery of work gently merge with the shadows of the night,